It's bright and early, of course, Monday morning here at 7:30 in the morning, out here in the West Coast. I'm really actually thankful for the opportunity to share this information with you. Because really, this has been a 10-year journey, getting to this point here, getting this point in time in history, and it's really been quite extraordinary. So what we're looking at, of course, this is a giant version of the IAM board. Let me grab the smaller one. So we went from this position here to, of course, having a smaller version. And within the program, this is what gets mailed out to people. And we had a few revisions of it, but it's the same fashion. And of course, we have this version here that goes out to individuals along with the IAM tokens, right? So again, this is a very giant version. And what I found was, of course, really necessary to create something very visual. But before we get into this, let me give you a little bit of the backstory about this whole process and how I came to be here. So it's it wasn't until probably until I was 28 when I first stepped back. I first stepped back out into what you call reality. First stepped back into the world. I moved from south of Portugal into back to Canada, and I've been gone. I've been out of Canada for about 3.5 to 4 years, and I came back having only a grade 10 education. I had $0 in the bank. I had no money to get home. I had I really had nothing going on. I've been smoking and drinking and been a rampant drug user probably since almost the age of 13. And my introduction into life was actually, there's some challenges to it. Unfortunately, like so many people, we come from environments where there wasn't a lot of support. Parents who needed support of their own because they were struggling in various aspects of their own life. So it became quite a challenge trying to navigate my way through the world, because the way I view the world was actually very different. I saw the world as very adversarial and a place not to be trusted, and people in general not to be trusted. So from leaving home at a very early age, I think the first time I left home, I was 8. I tried to make a break for it, and then it wasn't truly successful until I was about 13 years old. And then I managed to spend a couple of years away from home, living on the street, actually on the mainland here in Vancouver and Delta and Surrey. And I traveled around, and for me, living on the street actually didn't seem that dangerous. It wasn't great. It was cold, and it wasn't the ideal circumstance, but it felt safer than the environment I was living in. So, you can imagine the kind of environment that would create the contrast where you think living in the street is preferable and safer to living in your own home. So, my brothers and sisters, of course, we all had gone through that process. That was all part of our reality. And we didn't really think a whole lot of it. We just simply adapted to what was going on, and we basically fled. But nevertheless, that experience of having that kind of challenge in the very beginning of my life, and of course, and then being kind of buffered around until I was 28, and I had this kind of sick feeling after a conversation with my father, who I'd been really disconnected from for many years. And I was really quite disconnected, from the world in general, because I really hadn't participated in anything that was even remotely normal. But I realized that I had to do something, because I had this pit in the pit of my stomach that basically reminded me that one day I would drop dead, and nobody would know and nobody would care. I hadn't done anything. And I wasn't out here to win a Pulitzer Prize or a Nobel Peace Prize, but I hadn't even contributed even at the littlest level. And I was basically running around the world, running around the planet, thinking the world owed me something. And I was mad at my parents. I was mad at the people that affected my life on the way through. And so I really hadn't taken any responsibility or even thought that I could do anything different. And again, for some reason at the age of 28, I decided to take that challenge on. And I changed everything. I altered my entire existence. I started to study full time within my family's clinic, and I went through a process of working in natural healthcare for almost 3.5, 4 years again. And I became a chartered herbalist. I became a biokinesiologist. I studied Jin Shido acupressure. I became very well acquainted with a lot of other healthcare modalities. I got into the fitness world, where it was something that I really enjoyed a bit more. And I quickly accelerated to the fitness world to the point where I ended up owning my own orthopedic rehab center for about 17 years. And I became a medical exercise program director and a medical exercise specialist, again, on my own facility, which I only sold several years back. But along that journey, I was really fascinated by the fact that here we had this world full of opportunities on all levels, right? But looking at it from the fitness level, when my journey first began, I was curious to wonder why that, with access to so many resources, we have more resources now than ever before on nutrition. We have more information and resources around mental health care. We have more resources. We have more opportunities than ever before on so many things. And yet, despite the fact that we have more things going on, we have people doing worse and worse. Yes, some people are moving forward, but it's really, at the level of opportunity that we have, we don't see the level of success that should be correlated with that. Does that make sense? Right. So we have all this opportunity, but we just don't have all that success. There's more unhappiness, there's more obesity, there's more cancers, more diabetes, right? There's more problems everywhere we look. So, I'm a very curious human being, and I started exploring, why. Why is it that in a world of such massive opportunity, very few of us seem to be able to take hold of it? Is it truly just only the 1%? Or the 3%, or whatever small percentage number, they declare to be the really successful ones, and everybody else is going to struggle through with mediocrity. And is that our lot of life? Is that my lot of life? So what I had discovered, or what I had kind of stumbled upon when I was when I was running my center, is that part of the success I had when I was working with orthopedic rehab, which simply means an orthopedic surgeon would send somebody in that he had just replaced their knee or replaced their hip, or somebody came in with an ACL reconstruction or spinal surgery, or any number of things, some surgical intervention on the body, on the mechanics of the body. And it was my job, part of my job, to see if I could make them stronger, right? So the injury was dealt with surgically, and it was my job to move them to the next level. And so what I discovered, though, is that when somebody had a hip surgery, knee surgery, of course, once the surgery was done, and even though we got them training, and even though the inflammation was gone, even though they could weight bear a little bit, they were still not really all that functional. They still weren't strong. They still weren't better, right? So, the actual issue was dealt with, right? The arthritis is gone, the issue was gone within the joint, but they still weren't where they really could have been. And I wondered how far we could take them. And I began to wonder what the limitations were. So what was fascinating is that, of course, when you have an injury to the body, let's say somebody has had their ACL rebuilt. So the ACL is just a ligament inside the knee joint. And so normally when the ACL is damaged, it's damaged by trauma quite often. So meaning that if let's say I'm a soccer player, and I'm running on the field and I step and turn, well, if my foot gets kind of trapped on the turf and I turn, the knee joint itself will rotate, and of course the bones in the knee joint will actually often sever the tendons that run through connecting two bones together. So if somebody comes in with a severed ACL, of course that's what they end up fixing. So imagine the pain around that injury, right? Imagine the pain of stepping down and rotating your knee. I know it makes you cringe, right? Rotating your knee through, right, and having that level of discomfort, right? So they rotated through. So a year later, of course, the injuries have been repaired, and the new tendon's stronger, generally stronger than the original one. Pain's gone, the inflammation's gone, but people still don't want to put weight on the joint. And so what I discovered, of course, in that process was that not only was the injury to the knee the actual site of the trauma, right, but the injury was also to the mind, meaning that the memory, and the memories are we'll call them neural maps for this conversation, right? So the map, right, the remembrance, the neural map of my knee injury is still there. So when I go to put weight down on that knee, guess what my brain's going to do? It's going to offer me the memory saying, are you sure you want to do that? Are you sure you want to put weight on that knee? So I was kind of fascinated going, well, if the injury to the knee is also recorded in the mind, and the limitations around the strength in that knee and my ability to put strength in that knee, the limitations are in the mind, how do we change that? And that's what I stumbled upon some work from John Green and Richard Bandler, these guys that actually had created something called neurolinguistic programming back in the 60s. So again, I'm a prolific reader. I read everything, I've been reading every day for the last 20 some years because somebody once said, if you read every day in your field of interest, you would be the leading authority, the highest paid in your industry within 10 years. Well, that never happened, but it did give me a great deal of knowledge. Neither the most intelligent or highest paid in my industry, but it did give me a great deal of knowledge. And what it gave me is a great lateral view. So I began to see different aspects of how to move forward around moving people forward that nobody had really conceived before. So I started actually this process, what we call think, feel, and do. So I imagine that if the injury to my knee is still recorded in my mind, let's go to the level of the mind and how do we fix it? So we decided that we needed to go from a different space. If the injury to my knee was remembered here, I needed to find somewhere else to take it. So we needed a new foundational idea, right, to deal with the knee. Does that make sense? So we create this process called think, feel, do. And so the thought process, we'd spend time with the individual, say, okay, in order to put weight on that knee, you need a really strong, stable core, right? And if you've been involved in fitness at all, you've heard this conversation before, I'm sure, a million times. So we're putting weight on that knee, either through the old map or we put weight on the knee through a new map. So we started doing core work over the course of a couple of weeks, and we'd invest time teaching the client, this is what your core looks like. We'd show imaging, 3D imaging around the core. This is what your core feel like. So we'd have to sit down on the ground or lay down on the ground and get them to start working their core musculature, right? So this is what it looks like, this is what it feels like. Now you know what it looks like, right? You have an image of it. You have a kinesthetic reference. Now you know what it feels like. You hear the words, which are auditory. Now you have a auditory, visual, and kinesthetic reference of your core, right? So we call it visual, auditory, kinesthetic, so VAK. Now you have a new sensory map of your core. Now we're going to turn those core muscles on, and we're going to teach you how to do that until you've got a really strong map in your mind. And you can think, feel, and do that core pretty rapidly. Now I want you to think, feel, do the core, and now put weight on the knee from that vantage point. Right, you with me? And what was really quite surprising, and maybe not surprising because I think intuitively I knew this was going to work, is what we found is that, of course, when people that went through that process and then put weight on that joint, whether it was a knee, an ankle, a hip, the pain went away. And there was no apprehension because we built a brand new map and we created a real stable base. So I was very excited to see that, of course, and very excited to see what I had thought and I had intuitively known really was showing up in a very powerful way. And of course, that created my practice over the course of 17 years. So imagine in this I am board here, in these pieces, that this is my core, right? And any exercise I did, right, any movement I did was controlled by my core. So I took the idea when I looked at psychology and I said, well, what is one of the problems that we have in a lot of our developed countries? That we don't know what we stand for, right? We don't have a core identity. We're not even sure what that is anymore. Now, in the beginning of the story, of course, I told you I lived in Portugal for about 4 years. So what I got living in Portugal was what I had this really interesting sense of congruency, or what they call coherence. So I lived in the south of Portugal, and no matter where I went, there was a certain element of trust. There's a certain element of comfort because, there was Portuguese people everywhere. It was their country. They had a tradition, right? They had traditional Portuguese practices. There was traditional Portuguese food. There was Portuguese music. There was Portuguese rituals and traditions. Most of the country was Catholic. The vast majority of the country was old Catholic. So they had a rich tradition of old Catholicism. So old Catholic Portuguese people living in Portugal. And that's very different than what, you look at somebody living in Canada. In Canada, there is no cultural identity, right? There's a geographic similarity. We live on a landmass. but there's nothing cultural about Canadians that is very specific, because we are multicultural. So living in this country for many years and traveling around, I realized that no matter where I went in the country, I had the same sense, right? The history was there, the rituals there. And so when I came back to North America, that was the real big contrast for me. And that's where I realized that was the biggest difference, is that we've lost in our desire to become something different, a desire to advance on all fronts. We actually lost what holds humans together, which is a strong cultural identity, a strong way of being. And you think about how long we've been on this planet and how long cultures have evolved inside their own space, you would think that, of course, it would probably almost be a part of our DNA. And I'm actually quite sure, and I'm looking through evidence of this right now, but looking at the research around how historic cultural identity actually shapes and controls our DNA, shapes and controls the way our genetics express themselves, right? Dr. Mario Martinez is a doctor I've been following for a while, who a lot of his work actually allows me to take what I'm doing here at a much deeper level. But culture has a lot to do with our identity. In North American culture, we don't have one. Right, which I think is a big part of the confusion that we have. So to explore a little bit further, so when I looked at that, the whole idea of core strength and think, feel, and do, when I started working this concept with clients, I looked at, well, we need to start with the core. We need to start with the core identity. And without starting here, without starting at the core, we can never actually develop the strength and the capacity and the consistency, right, the congruency in our life to move forward to the level that we want. So we live in our life, namely as this. So that's a reference point. Everything that we struggle with, everything from career to finances to contribution. Let me get this out of the way here. Everything we struggle with comes from that context, right? So when it comes to money, right, what does my brain historically reference? I was homeless, and I had no money for most of my life, right? And when I was 28, I still had no money, I had no education. So I was homeless. I never finished school, right? That's my reference point. Contribution, I couldn't contribute to myself, let alone the world. Spirituality, I really had believed that there's no such thing, because, look at the course of, look at how my life turned out. The people that were supposed to look after me couldn't look after themselves. So I had zero faith in that. Family, you serious? Right? No connection to this whatsoever. The kids I met on the street were my family. Wellness, the whole idea of wellness. Well, there was no wellness in my life. Right? See what happened in the family? That was actually very prophetic. Wellness, of course, there was no health. Relationships, never, right? You couldn't trust this. This didn't exist. Nothing here, nothing here, nothing here. And all these reference points, when I started building my life, that's all I could reference. So the struggles that we have, the current struggles we have in life, really come from these points, right? So I was broke. I had no education, right? I never finished school. Contribution, not even remotely possible. Spirituality, where you felt that God didn't care about people, right? Family, right? Had no trust there. Wellness, did not have wellness. I've been smoking drugs and smoking tobacco since the age of 13. 28 at that time, so nothing there. And I didn't care. I didn't even have a thought around it. And relationships, of course, are not to be trusted. Relationships basically were, I use you and you use me, and then we'll figure out how to make that work. But there was no relationships there, right? You don't have relationships on the street, right? You collaborate. And of course, money was never an issue because I never had any. And normally I was just, it's if you had money, then I was going to try to find a way to take it from you, right? As a young kid. So anytime we struggle, and most of the struggles that we have is because we're living in the past tense. And what's interesting is that the mind can only reference our history, right? So when I'm thinking about anything, as I'm thinking now, when I think about anything in life, what I am doing and what I can really only do is actually access my past. So I access my history around around money, and I access the sense of lack. Access my history around family, right? And my history around family was never good. So if I can only access my history, which is what our brain does all the time, right? Our brain accesses our memories. Our memories are stored visually, auditory, kinesthetically. If I can only access my memory has no memory of a lot of these parts of my life, really doesn't have really great context, then how am I going to move forward? And I think you can recognize in your own life, every area you struggle because your history around these areas, the history around these various areas in your life have had lots of challenges. And you keep referencing yourself. You keep referencing, so if I reference this individual here, right, my history around, I can reference back to, of course, going back to the late 80s. And if I keep referencing my emotions and my ideas about money and finances from me, who I was in the late 80s, I'd never move forward because there's so much lack here and so much fear. If I try to build a family and try to build relationships, but my memories around family and relationships date back into the 70s and 80s, and all my representation was, this is not to be trusted because that doesn't work. This is adversarial. This is basically a use me, use you kind of conversation. Then the likelihood of me actually having strong connection in family relationships going forward is actually going to be pretty slim. Right? Does that make sense? So the way our mind works, our mind has to access our history to make sense of what's currently going on. So when I recognized that challenge, I wondered what was possible if we could actually perhaps start here. What if I decided that I needed a new core identity? What if I decided that in order to move forward, I needed a whole new map in which to run from, right? It wasn't about buying the next book, because every time I buy a book, of course, the book doesn't seem to offer me the information. It doesn't seem to clean this stuff up effectively. And how many books do you have? I have thousands and thousands of dollars worth of books, and I've spent $50,000, $60,000, $70,000 on courses over the last 20 years. And is that enough information to move me forward? Is that powerful enough to move me forward? Well, yeah, it's moved the needle forward, but do you think for the amount of stuff that you've read, the amount of knowledge you know, you are at the level in life where you think you should be? And if not, do you ever wonder why? Well, of course, what I discovered, as I just mentioned previously, is that the reason why we don't move forward is that we're always looking backwards. So how do we move forward? If we're always living in the rearview mirror of our life, how do we move forward? And how do we move forward powerfully where we learn to access the best part of us? So part of the process is I had to decide, who do I need to be? And you may have heard this before in different books and lectures you've listened to. Who do I need to be? Who do I need to become to have the life that I want? Right? Who do I need to show up with on a daily basis? What do I need to remember? What do I need to create or imagine to have the life that I want, as far as in respects to myself? Well, one thing I know about myself, of course, I'm perseverant, right? Because I survived, so many years living on the street, living in that environment where a lot of people don't. So I know I'm perseverant, and I think about perseverance, I remember all the circumstances, situations where that was true about me. And I remember, I said, a lot of our memories are stored visually, auditory, kinesthetically. So I remember the different periods of time when I was perseverant. I remember the conversations around it. I remember the challenges and struggles, but I also remember, the sense of gratification of making it through some more challenging times in my life. So when I think about perseverance, of course, I want to remember the visual and the auditory and the kinesthetic part of that memory. I also know that, of course, that I have a degree of intelligence because now, if I had access to my history around intelligence, right? So part of it, when I looked at career and education, I would access the fact that historically I would have accessed the fact that I only had a grade 10 education, and but I also had to go remember that, of course, because I was perseverant. And yes, even though I did grade 10 was my last year in school officially. I ran a orthopedic rehab center for 17 years. My clients were doctors. My best friends are scientists and researchers. So I had to access the other side of the reality is that I'm an intelligent human being, and I'm very capable, right? I'm capable of accessing and understanding lots of challenging information. So I am that human being, right? I also am a high school dropout, but I also am intelligent, right? I also struggled in a lot of these different parts of my life, but I also am very perseverant. So there's always a contrast to the things we think the least about ourselves, and the things that are actually true on the other side. The flip side of it are also true. We just don't remember them. So part of the process is actually, before we start reading the book, before we start going forward, before we start making decisions, we want to create some declarations around who I am. And it's not a matter of just writing them down. Now you can write down that, I am loved, and I am abundant, and you can write all those things down, but they don't mean anything. Not if you just put them on paper. It's very one-dimensional. So we have to get in the act of remembering these events, remembering what happened, remembering when we were those things. So when you go through the process of remembering, you take time, you learn how to go through the process of remembering powerfully. So when you wake up, you can access your I am values, I am statements. So I am perseverant, I'm intelligent, and I'm empathetic. I'm hugely empathetic, right? So which means I feel you, I feel the struggle, which is why this program evolved, and why I took this chance of investing large amounts of time and large amounts of money and putting myself out there, because I get the struggle, and it sucks. It really does. So I get the challenge of having all these books and having all this capacity, and it's somewhere in here that you deserve more, that you're capable of more. You just don't know why. And the reason why we don't move forward is that we keep looking backwards. And this program is designed to show you how, once and for all, to move yourself out of that position. But here's the most important piece. So in the body of the message here, we talked about wellness. So we look at the fitness industry, which has been my industry for 2 decades, for sure. And I look at, when people look at wellness, well, we look at wellness, whatever that means to you. We need to look at wellness in the context of not only of my I am values, but how does wellness relate to family, right? So any improvement here. So let's say you're not doing very well. Let's say your health is poor. And so let's say wellness is a little bit off the board here. When I move wellness off the board like this, does that actually have a negative impact on relationships? Yeah, it sure does. Does wellness, the reduction in your wellness have an impact on your family? And you have to admit, yes, it does. Does wellness, the lack of wellness, right? The lack of wellness have an impact on your ability to earn money? Absolutely. So if you look around the board, does wellness have an impact on all these things? Your sense of spirituality, your sense of contribution, your career, your financial ability, your relationships. Does your lack of wellness have an impact on you? Of course. But when we go through life, when we make decisions, we make plans, we tend to think in one dimension. We tend to think wellness all by itself without the context of all these other things on the board. We don't take into mind all these other things. So we have a tendency to actually think about wellness all by itself. And we don't draw in the connection of how powerful wellness is to all these other parts of our life, because we're doing this stuff in our head. And so the designation, the I Am project, and of course the tools that you get are designed to take it all out of your head, and you start building a life. So all these pieces fit, and that's what we call congruency or harmony, right? We want to create harmony in people's lives, right? But you can't look at it in one dimension. So when I look at wellness, and I create wellness, part of the goal around wellness is that, of course, first of all, I'm going to build wellness on my values, which for me was perseverance, intelligence, and empathy. And empathy can include having empathy for myself, not just for people around me. So when I think about perseverance and intelligence and empathy, is it possible that I can actually have a much more powerful mental foundation around wellness than I had before? Because if I look at my history, if I look at my history and I try to build wellness from this point, I was unhealthy. I was broke. I basically used people because they used me. So I figured that was fair. No money, no career, no such contribution. Didn't care. Spirituality, no connection. Family didn't exist. Relationships didn't care, and wellness wasn't even on the board. So what can I build from there? If all I remember is my negative history. So I realized that was a sticking point, is that we keep accessing our history, so we needed to come up with a new way of going about it. So as an exercise, when you're building a strong core, the only way to become really physically fit and own it forever and access incredible amount of strength, we understood that we need to take time to develop a strong core, not only physically, but neurologically, mentally. So we created this beautiful map inside the brain of a strong physical core, and we did really quite extraordinary things, right? And it was actually quite amazing what we started doing inside of our facility, which is why the facility ran for 17 years before I moved on to this line of work. So the same thing stands, of course, for our psychology, right? If once we understand that we need to build this powerfully, but we do this work first. We don't even attempt any of this stuff here first, right? So we spend a week, even up to a week to 2 weeks, being guided and instructed on how to create this, how to pull it out of your mind, right? How to design it. And then, of course, the work, of course, once you have that declaration, once you understand what the values are, and you learn that you actually had some extraordinary parts in your history, you're just not remembering it. But we're kind of hardwired to the negative, which you have already experienced. We're hardwired to remember the more challenging parts of our life, because our mind, our brain, the more primordial part of our brain really says, we need to look out for, possible injury. We need to look out for challenges in our environment. We need to stay alive. So the brain is trying to keep us alive, but it's a real prehistoric part of our psychology. And it's not really that necessary in today's environment, not at the level that it's working most of us, right? So we need to temper that down and say, okay, thank you for the information, thank you for the fear and the uncertainty. But if I look around and realize my environment's safe, my current environment's safe, my history might have been challenging, but there's nothing going wrong right now other than the problems I'm creating. Step into my I am values, know what it looks like, know what it feels like, know what it sounds like, know where it shows up inside my body, and just move myself up that position powerfully. And then from this vantage point, from this core identity, then I start building these other aspects of my life. Now, if you took the strongest part of your identity and you allow that to show up on a daily basis powerfully, so it infiltrated every cell in your body, would your wellness be better? Would your ideas around health and wellness be different? Would your mindset around career be different? Would your relationships be more powerful? How would family dynamics be for you? What would your sense of spirituality? What would be your ability to contribute? So again, when you go through this process, the reason why we've always had these challenges is that we've been trying to do it inside of our mind, right? So inside of our head, all your history's in there. Every good and bad thing that's ever happened to you exists in your mind. Everything that ever happened, period, in your life is recorded in your mind, visually, auditory, kinesthetically. Right? So we have a huge database of details about our life in our mind. And we access it unconsciously. And when we're asking a question of our mind, if I'm asking a question, does God exist? Does God care for me? And I'm accessing my history around my belief system around God and spirituality is really negative. The negative part of my mind and the emotions that were connected to it. Let's say when I was 15, this is my experiences around when I was 15. My experience around spirituality is very negative. So if I'm asking inside my head, what is your experience with God? What is your belief around God's spirituality? The memory of me when I was 15 will show up. Not that I know it does. I just have the idea that shows up. The feeling shows up. And of course, the 15-year-old emotional context is much different than the 53-year-old. And to the 15-year-old, he'll believe God is dead and God doesn't care. Right? But there's a very different point in time in my life. But if I allow the emotions and the ideas of the 15-year-old to show up inside my head continuously along this, I would never change my relationship with what I believe. But we don't know. Unless I understood that, I wouldn't know it was the 15-year-old. I would just feel it's me having the feeling. And to me, God is dead. And the feeling around family, and this was just pretty chaotic for many, many years. So if I'm thinking about, should I have a family? Do I trust family relationships? Do I trust that? Do I want that? And if I access my history unconsciously, when I'm thinking inside my head, of course, what's my feeling around family? It's not good. Right? So would I have a desire? Would I feel connected? And would I feel loving? And would I feel attached to family? Not at all. But the emotions are from my history. But the problem is when we think inside without actually having any other context to work with, we have the feelings currently, so we think it's our current feelings around family, and it doesn't work. So we have to upgrade our software. And the I Am project over the course of the weeks of these different modules is designed to help upgrade your software by first of all, taking it out of your head, spending a week to 2 weeks working on your I Am values, building this incredible core. So no matter where you look in your life, there you are. And you actually begin to trust your own judgment, trust your decision-making process, trust the fact that you have this strength. and trust in the fact that you know better. And now you understand why you're not doing better, because you're accessing your history. That's what some of the mind does. So it's not your fault. How the hell would you know? I've been studying for almost 25 years. And I just started to put some of these ideas together. I'm working with counselors and clinical therapists, and there's actually a clinical researcher out of the States I just connected with a couple of days ago, and he's fascinated by the process, but he gets it, right? So if these people at that level see this process and the value of it, is it any wonder why so many of us struggle? Because we just didn't know how all this stuff worked. So, through lots of years and lots of work and lots of frustration, but lots of willingness to be perseverant, and willingness, and I had this huge empathy for myself and for so many people I've met around the world in the last 20 years of my life. I know the frustration, I know the struggle, and I think we can have it all. I think we can actually be powerful in all these different parts of our life. We just need to start with a more centered space. So that's the introduction to the I Am project, the initial context of it. Again, it's been 10 years in the making, and I'm thrilled, because what we're seeing now is that the way we can move the needle forward in people's lives, what we can do in a matter of weeks, the average person has not been able to accomplish in a matter of decades. And I was working with my father on this just a couple of weeks back, and he's 78 years old. We went back to a memory of his, and again, this is all private, where you don't divulge anything. Nobody has to know your secrets. That's the best part about this. It's all done in privacy of your own mind. So it's not about retelling your story verbally over and over again, because a lot of us don't have, I don't want to tell people all the crazy stuff that I experienced. I don't want to have a conversation. I would go to a counselor for $200 an hour and lie to them. I just couldn't offer that information up. So this way I found a private way to kind of get rid of all my demons and make myself centered. It's not by avoiding and running and hiding. It's actually working with all of it, but in a much more powerful way inside of my head, in front of me on the I Am Project Intuition Board. So again, that's the overview of the program. Tomorrow, of course, we're going into the how-to, how we actually get into these other parts more powerfully. But I'm excited. I'm excited because again, this has been a long time coming, and I think we all deserve it. We all deserve to be able to be living in the current context of our life, not wondering why it's not working, and not living heavily in one part of our life at the expense of others. I really do believe that we have it all. Guys, thanks for tuning in this morning. Have an incredible Monday morning or Tuesday for you fine folks in Australia, and we'll see you tomorrow. All right, bye-bye.